Hello, everyone. My name is Baylan Megino. I am here with Global Dream Makers Leadership Summit for Spring 2022. I am absolutely honored to welcome Jonathan Reynolds to the stage. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Baylan. Thank you so much for having me.
Uh, it's so funny because whenever I have you come on, I think extra hard about, okay, am I being mindful? Be mindful now. Be present, Baylan.
No
This is the
pressure.
This is a mindfulness man. He is it. Okay, let me tell everyone a little bit about you before we start, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Jonathan Reynolds is the founder and CEO of Mindful Life, Mindful Work Incorporated, a San Francisco-based leadership development company providing services that address the intersection of self-awareness and team performance. Excuse me. Since 1997, Jonathan has trained extensively in the discipline of mindfulness, and his work with leaders emphasizes simple and practical ways to improve performance, efficiency, and workplace cultures by integrating mindfulness and sensibilities. Today, he's going to be speaking to us about mindful relationships and how they align your purpose and your performance. This is really something of great interest to all of us, especially now that we are in the throes of the great reshuffle. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you say, Jonathan.
Hmm. I'm looking forward to it as well. I think part of what makes for a good talk is it's developed in process. So yeah, I'm very excited to explore these ideas as well.
Oh, good, good, good. But before you get into that, can you just give us a sense? Because most people haven't seen you, even
Hmm.
though you're very well known. I would think that most of the people who are coming to this haven't seen you or don't know enough about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, or at least how did you come to focus on mindfulness?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for the question. So I, like many people as a young adult, was depressed, was having a hard time in life after I graduated from college. I came to what I now sort of recognize was something like an existential crisis around meaning, around, oh, if learning how to balance my checkbook and drive a car was all there was to life, then life was pretty meaningless. And in that recognition, sort of had a dark night of the soul experience, and went looking for meaning, went looking for something that was reliable. So started inward practices, things like meditation, things like yoga, in an effort to be fully human, to be fully alive. And that organically grew over time, and codified, and became my work. And there's lots of steps in there, of course, but Mindful Life, Mindful Work was really born around 2011. Really wasn't incorporated till I believe 2018. So we're just about 4 years old in that regard as far as a formal entity. And we offer assessment, coaching, consulting, and training. And again, it's all been very organically out of sort of inner awareness, touching meaning, and then how does that get translated and expressed outwardly?
I'm waiting for this very loud motorcycle to pass
Mm.
so I can hear myself. So, one thing that I know that all entrepreneurs look at and have to face at some point pretty early on in their journey is, how do you choose the audience that you work with? How do you choose your clients? How do
Yeah,
you?
that for me was about sphere of influence. It was about impact. The core of the offering and the idea is to be of service and to be useful in the world. And so when I looked at uh, where I could extend my sphere of influence to the maximum, really two demographics emerged for me: children and the business world. And I chose the business world because I felt like the impact of dollars on the greater world could potentially be more extensive. That doesn't mean that that was necessarily the right choice. I think you either start young and make the world a better place, or you start with those with resources that can impact it sort of in a shorter term. I think both are really important. I think you come from both directions. Of course, there's lots of other choices other than those two, but I really sat with those two. And who knows, as Mindful Life, Mindful Work grows, maybe we'll circle back and start providing services for children at some point. If not formally, definitely through the professionals that we work with. I mean, folks are embedded in families and cultures and cities and towns. And so again, I think it's really important to extend the impact, especially if you're doing good work in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a similar reason of why I work with the people that I work with, is because those are the people who make the decisions that affect groups of other people,
Mm,
and that way one point of contact can have huge impact.
mm,
So I'm
mhm.
going to step back. I'm going to sit back. I actually have my paper and pen here because I want to take notes, because you're going to be sharing the brilliance about mindful relationships, especially about the relationships part and how we align. Aligning is something that is just like so integral to who I am. So I'm sitting back. I'm going to listen. I'm going to turn off my mic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for the wonderful introduction and the platform and the opportunity. I want to work backwards in this a little bit. I want to actually start with performance and then work our way back, because I see it sort of as a pyramid, or sort of foundational in layers. And the tip of the pyramid is performance or excellence. Like, what does it actually mean to perform excellently? And I think we touched upon this just briefly already. Well, I think it's work done in love. I think it's service work done from a loving and helping place that is sort of the end goal. And that doesn't exclude making lots of money. I think that money should be there. And so I just think that's really important to tag, is it's hard to create a foundation for something that we don't know where we're headed or where we want to actually go. Generally speaking, of course, you need clear specific goals and sort of markers and KPIs and things like this along the way. But what is the end goal? And I think this is where purpose comes in, and I think this is where meaning comes in, is if we're really clear on what the end goal is, then a lot of the steps to get there start to clarify. I think in some ways that's where Mindful Life, Mindful Work started. We wanted to be helpful. We wanted to be useful. We wanted to help people have better lives, make more money, and make the world a better place. Really simple, but also really important. If that's not stated, then it can get really murky in decision makings. We're not murky in our decisions because we're really clear about, is this making the world a better place for folks? Because if it's not, if it's just clever or complicated and sort of neat, who cares? Like, it has to actually be useful. And so that performance piece, that excellence piece, I think rests upon relationships. And like I've already said, is purpose. Well, what makes good relationships? Well, I think there's a self-awareness piece, which I'll speak about in a little bit. But I think people that are aligned to the common goal. If you get a bunch of people that don't care about something and try to get them to work together on that something they don't care about, you're going to have a real mess. And I think a lot of companies are discovering during this great resignation, or whatever we call it, is there people actually were never on board. They were there. And again, everybody has to do what they have to do at stages in their life. Sometimes a job is just a paycheck, of course, but that can't last forever. And I think that once you align people on a purpose and people say, hey, we're doing this together, we're doing this thing that we all care about. And if it changes, then we need to adapt. But for now, we all care about this thing. And so I think the purpose informs healthy relationships. And so let's step a layer down now from relationships and purpose. Or maybe not even a step down, a step sideways into creating healthy culture. I think it's one of the biggest pieces, the companies are recognizing that you can have all the best people, you can have all the smartest people, the most skilled people. Just like on a basketball team, you can have all the best athletes and they still lose all the time. What's going on? Well, it's not about having all the smartest people and all the best athletes. It's about something else intangible that happens when the foundations for a healthy culture are put in place. In a sports metaphor, that might be, oh, spend some social time off the court, or or something like that. You're seeing that with team building. Oh, everybody go bowling together and let's just get outside of our roles and just goof around together a little bit. But if you don't create the foundations for that healthy culture, it doesn't matter how great your systems are. It doesn't matter how great all that other stuff. Without that culture aligned on a certain and important purpose, doesn't matter who you got. And so I think that's something that companies are waking up to is, oh, we didn't do the culture piece because it's so intangible. It's often hard to name. It often takes time. And it's often not a straight line. It's not a one-to-one correlative thing that you can say, oh, do these things, do these 10 things, and you'll have a good culture. No, it's really responsive. It's really relational. And so now to take the final step back, and that's to awareness as a foundation. Self-awareness practices, things like mindfulness, other self-awareness practices, and not only self-awareness, but once this self becomes aware, then it's about extending that into systemic awareness, into all of the fabric and nodes and relationships that connect to create a web that is culture. Again, there's that interior to culture and there's that exterior. There's the exterior things like what's the work day? There's the, oh, what are our business practices? How long are meetings? When are meetings? This is all external culture stuff that helps, but it's the internal culture stuff. It's, dare I say the word consciousness stuff. It's that awareness stuff around how do we feel when we're together? How do we want to feel when we're together? What are we going to do when we don't feel that way? How are we going to respond when it's going badly? If you don't have these things in place, if you don't have sort of agreements around, oh, when somebody's having a bad day, do we just shame them and make them feel like they're doing a bad job? Or have we agreed that there's going to be some way that we actually respond to that and help that? And so these all contribute, of course, to alignment. When we're aligned, if we're all going to push a big boulder up a hill together, and it's going to take 300 of us to do that, if people are pushing the wrong direction, or they're sitting on top of the boulder, or they're laying on the side, we're going to roll it and we're going to roll it over them, it's going to be a big problem. And only if, and again, that's a really rough metaphor, but only if we're aligned on, oh, this is how you feel, this is how I feel, how do we want to feel together, really is a feeling thing. And I know, work has gotten overly heady, overly intellectual. And ultimately, the thing that still gets business done and accomplishes things is love of service, love of our colleagues. We have to know them as people and we have to love them. It doesn't mean we have to love everything about them or think they're great, but we have to love them as human beings and want to see them succeed as much as we want to succeed ourselves. Doesn't mean there can't be healthy competition. There just can't be toxic competition. And so I think that's really what I want to convey today, is that performance actually does have building blocks. And it's not about being really smart. It's not about working really hard even. It's about being together and wanting to show up for the team in your best way and to help them be their best way. Because when that's true, doesn't mean you're going to succeed every time. But that can only be true if you have enough internal awareness. If each person is practicing some internal awareness, it's why things like mindfulness programs at companies are booming right now, because, oh, it's not only me awareness, it's we awareness. You know, we've all heard from me to we. Go to the collective, go to that piece, because me, that isolated sense of self, is actually dysfunctional. It's actually, to an extreme, it's dysfunctional. Yes, we have to have a strong identity. Yes, we have to have a strong ego, meaning a sense of self, not egotistical. I like the saying, wherever I go, ego. And so, but we need this strong I so we can show up for the group. But if we never get beyond the strong I, it's just self-absorption. And that is actually a really dark place to be. And so this capacity to connect to others, to relate to others, it's a skill, but it's also our nature. It's our nature to be social. If it was really our nature to be alone, we'd all live as far away from each other as possible. We wouldn't live in cities. I mean, of course we live in cities to divide resources and things like this, but we also do it to be together. We feel safer together. You ever been out in the middle of nowhere all by yourself? You ever been out in the middle of nowhere with a group of 20 people? It's a very different experience. And so I think it's really important in this is that if we really want to feel nurtured by our work, if we really want to perform, if we really want to connect to some purpose, we have to do it together. That's it. That's all I got to say.
I think that's awesome. That's awesome. I love the way that you've broken it down. So here's a question, an HR kind of question. What if you hire someone and you think they're going to fit into the culture really well, but once they finally get on site, they're not that social?
Yeah, you either, thank you for the question. In those sorts of situations, you need to have an honest conversation. And that conversation needs to happen as soon as possible. Either, oh, we're going to accept that this is the way you work and it's not a fit, and we're going to maximize your value in the way that you like to work. Even though it's not a fit, we're going to try to make it work. Or you say, this isn't working. Sorry. And I think part of what happens is companies wait too long to have that conversation. And then the problem is it creates other problems, because it is a system. Because even if that person is off in a cave doing their role, they're still a part of the system. They're still impacting the system. And if it hasn't been accepted that they're going to be off in a cave, or we're going to try to bring them into around the fire, like if it hasn't been sort of laid out like that deliberately, and just, oh, I hope it goes away, I hope the problem goes away, or I hope it gets better, it's not going away, and it's not getting better on its own. You should know that ahead of time. And so in those situations, I've often seen that person just needs to be let go, probably. First you have the conversation. You don't know knee-jerk stuff, but you have the conversation, and if it really isn't working, it isn't working. And it's not exactly that one bad apple can ruin the barrel, but it can. And the problem is if you tolerate the bad apple, then and bad's not the right word, because maybe it's just not a match. But if you tolerate the really strong mismatch, then you start to lose good apples. Then other people start to leave. I mean, I've seen this in cultures that are, say they're merit-based, but they're really just playing favorites. And then at some point, the performers leave because they say, if this isn't merit-based and you just got to go have a beer with so-and-so to get the promotion, then, and I don't do that, well, then, this isn't the place for me. And so you start losing high performers. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but I think, and this is where the awareness piece comes in. You have to feel in your gut when it's not right. And you have to trust that. The HR person has to trust that, like, boy, I've gotten a few responses from people and it doesn't feel good. If it doesn't feel good, it's not good. And to know that, and then you go looking for metrics and measurables and have conversations and those sorts of things. But the seed of it, boy, I haven't felt that with an employee in a while. I wonder why. That's an awareness practice. And I think we're so conditioned to not pay attention to those cues. So you say, oh, must have been something I ate. Or that's weird. Every time I'm around them, I feel that. It's just coincidence. No, it's not coincidence. You're getting information that you should be listening to. It's probably more valuable than anything you can find on the computer.
That is great. That is great. Because where do we start? Okay, so that's where we start. It's that point of awareness. Just as you were saying that in your three layers, right? The last one, which is
Mm.
actually the first one, is the self awareness, and then the we awareness. So, how do you suggest that people start to learn how to be more mindful and therefore more aware of how they feel, what their environment, a lot of people say, oh, how do you build empathy? Well, I don't know. Is empathy the thing to focus on, or is it self awareness?
Well, I think that because we're each embedded in the system ourselves, that
Mm.
they're not exclusive practices. Ultimately, anyone who grows self-awareness grows empathy, because at some point there's, oh, if this is a self-awareness, there's other self-awarenesses. And so at some point, it's like, it's a natural sort of flowering of that. I think, at least in my experience, the quickest route to growing these things is a meditation practice. I don't know where I'd be without my own meditation practice. It's the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of all creativity. It's the foundation of all sort of wanting to give back. It's the foundation of me resourcing myself so I can show up my best self in any given moment. So that's my recommendation. And it's hard to start a meditation practice, but it doesn't need to be. So I say that because you start out simple. I like to say for the first 2 or 3 years that I meditated, I was pretending to meditate. I didn't know what I was doing, and nobody does. You sit there and you close your eyes and like, is this it? That's everybody's experience. That's everybody's experience. And you start there. You start simple. You start curious. And all you got to do is be curious and open to something that you might not know or be aware of. And that's an act of vulnerability. That's an act of humility. Many people won't get there unless they're in a really tough place in their life and they don't feel like they have any other options. I was lucky. I was sort of like overly sensitive and had a very low tolerance for discomfort. And so I could go to it really easily because I knew that if I didn't, I was going to be in a bad place. And so I think that's sort of the quickest. It doesn't have to be formal practice, although I highly recommend formal practice, meaning you actually sit down and you close your eyes and you watch your breath, and that's formal practice. The rest of life is informal practice. They support each other. So that's my recommendation, and that as a foundation. I can't relate to you skillfully unless I have some awareness of me. Otherwise, what am I relating from? And so I think that's something, the intellectual mind gets so external, outward facing, that I think people forget that the world inside is just as vast as the world outside.
It's fascinating in there, isn't it? We get all kinds of great information that pops up. Um, so what do you find? Let's say someone is self-aware and they are able to sense and understand what their environment is telling them. Um, how does a company, let's say a company that's been around a while, how does a company uh, redirect or refocus their culture so that it can be more supportive of this purpose and performance alignment?
Great question, very difficult question.
Mm.
The short answer is very, very slowly. Depending on the size of the company, I like metaphors. It's when you're on a jet ski, you can just turn left whenever you want to. But when you're in a 1,000-foot boat, if you're going to take a left-hand turn, you have to plan several miles ahead of time. And so depending on the size of the company, it's usually a very slow turn. Because you don't want to overly, you have to destabilize a little bit to make a change, but you don't want to overly destabilize. You also don't want to create a place that's psychologically unsafe. And even healthy stuff can be experienced as psychologically unsafe when it's new. And so I think it's really important to go slowly and start with little pilots and little experiments. And then if there's results and it feels good and people want to extend that, then it grows. It's just like, I mean, in some ways it's on a larger scale what we do with our own meditation practice, right? We sit and meditate, and we don't become a vegetarian on day one. We don't leave our spouse on day one because we've seen the light. Like, we don't do those things. Like, I'm growing into it. And the same is true of a company. You start with a conversation around, oh, this is going to help us. This is going to support us. People are going to stop leaving because it's a more welcoming and more human culture. Not every company is ready for that. And so part of the challenge is to find champions within companies that want to experiment, want to test the waters, want to see. You see in a lot of big companies, actually, often like mindfulness in big companies, it's often just an employee starts a little meditation group with like 3 of their friends. And then all of a sudden there's 600 of them on a Zoom call doing it together. That's usually how things happen, or very often how things happen in companies. And then the company says, hey, this is working. What are you guys doing? Your department is performing higher, or like people aren't quitting from your department. What's going on? Let's create a company-wide program. That's how a lot of these things, I'm guessing, started at the companies that have them. I mean, look at the Google story, or look at SAP. Often there's a backstory that's something very similar to that. And now I think companies are getting to a place where they're saying, hey, these companies that are performing so well, we don't need our CEO to have a near-death experience like Aetna to onboard some of this stuff. Like, let's do it proactively. So I think companies are starting to recognize this, but it's still a slow go. It's still a company, and an organization by definition is organized, and it's organized for one very clear purpose, which is to make money. Hopefully it's also organized for the purpose of serving the community in some way, but that's not always clear which one is the bigger priority. If money gets above service, then decision making can get really iffy, and they're always going to be close. But service, I think, needs to be on top, the main priority, and then the money will come. And but again, it's left to be unseen with certain companies for sure.
There it is. What comes to mind is how so much of our company life has been based on the external referral, right? The competition that can get all the way into the extreme as toxic. To really not look at yourself, not listen to yourself, and to just be one of the cogs in the big wheel so that everything can continue to move forward. And we are now becoming aware that this needs to change. And companies are starting to make that shift, obviously, because you're doing well. But this is going to be a really bumpy ride. It's going to be a bumpy ride, especially when you have a large sales department where all they've been doing is looking at that metric of, well, okay, how am I doing against everybody else? And I have to be the one on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind in that. I mean, a few good books actually come to mind. I think Conscious Capitalism, the book, started a lot of this awakening. We can do things for a better reason. And then the other book I'll mention is Fred Kaufman's book, The Meaning Revolution. I love the metaphor. I think he uses a soccer team in there. And he said the goal of the team is to win the game. The goal of the team isn't just for the offense to score as many points as possible and the defense to prevent as many points as possible. If that was true, the offense would be happy with an 11-10 loss more than a 6-5 win. Because if their whole goal was just to score a lot of points, they don't care if they win or lose. And so I think this extends really great, this metaphor, into companies, in that the reward system around individual performance or department performance and these sorts of things actually misses the main point, which is the goal of the company is to win whatever they're trying to win, whether that's to be the best at service or to make the most money, or some combination. But the goal is to perform as a company, not as individuals. And so some sort of reward system, or incentivizing it in a way that it's not about us against them, because in those sorts of scenarios, you get the siloing effect, of course, but you also get departments that are competing against each other because they don't see each other as on the same team. And that's, of course, really unhealthy. And that's a real drain on being human at work. So this idea that when we align and we get folks together towards some common goal, and the goal is to win, and again, not in a win-lose, not in a zero-sum sense, but to do really well. If that is the goal, then show up and perform in that direction, rather than some concern around, and again, there needs to be some individual measuring and metrics, of course, but the team needs to win. The company needs to win whatever it's trying to win. And so I think that's a really important shift that is going to be really hard to have happen in a culture that has privileged and given primacy to the individual. And this dates back probably before rugged individualism, but definitely, was reinforced and codified there, like, oh, the hero just pushes through on their own. Well, nobody is self-made. Very few of us, raised chickens to lay the egg that we probably ate this morning, or, did the ceramics to have the plate to put the egg on. No, we're completely dependent every morning on probably hundreds of thousands of people. Very few of us made the clothes we're wearing. And so to recognize that, oh, this is all interconnected. And so what does it mean to win as a species? Ultimately, that's the win, right? All these companies, and that's where conscious capitalism comes in, is capitalism is a really important and powerful driver for good. Maybe the biggest driver for good when done well. Also, lots of evil in capitalism, of course, lots of using it not for good. But this capacity to generate value, to align us on purpose, to solidify and acknowledge our interconnectedness as humans and our interconnectedness beyond humanity and to the planet and to other things, I think is really essential. And I think our culture has no choice but to awaken to it. There'll be bumps, there'll be regressions. There'll be those that wish for the good old days. The good old days weren't that good.
Yes, once we become aware of something different, that there's another possibility that might even be better, um, it just needs context. It just needs context. It needs contrast. It needs to be able to see where is it in that hierarchy, or the I understand where you're saying, well, it's not really above, it's kind of to the side, and because I like to draw diagrams, right? Well, where am I going to put this? They're kind of, they all happen simultaneously. It's almost like time, isn't it? Collapsed time, and it's all happening at the same time, right? We're all individuals. We're all part of a culture, and we're all doing it all together. We're all doing it together and making sure that our foundations are strong. So when you go into a company, Jonathan, what is the very first thing you do? What can people expect is the first thing that they're going to get out of you?
The first thing they're going to get is listening and lots of questions. I think anytime you enter a family of relationships, it's really good to keep your mouth shut and to receive the information and to know that you don't know the information. And so lots of questions, lots of listening, very little suggestions initially, and to really get a sense. And so that can show up as a formal assessment. That can show up as informal assessments and just lots of good conversations, lots of good learning. I want to dial back just for a second to something you said just before you even asked that question, which was around, I think it was around excellence and performance. It's hard to convince somebody who believes in the status quo and that things are good enough, that better is available. Now, all of us, when it gets worse, we want to fix it. But the quest for excellence and ultimate performance and really great performance isn't a perfectionist striving infinitely. But what it is it's this sort of this check-in of, am I running on the best quality fuel? Am I actually performing at my highest in a way that is fully rewarding? Because if we're not, it's good enough. Life is good enough as is for most folks. But is good enough good enough? That's ultimately the question. And can we access that growth edge, that excellence edge, in a way that doesn't make us discontent with good enough? We still need to be content with exactly what is, because it is what is, and strive. And so how can both of those be there? That's really a mindfulness practice. How can we develop endlessly and accept endlessly right where we are? That's really a mindfulness practice. And so, and I think that extends into the answer in companies, is how can you say, good job, you guys are doing good, and how about we tinker? How about we experiment? And so it has to have that flavor of curiosity, experimentation, and play. Let's be fun. People aren't going to do it if it's not fun. It doesn't have to be funny or goofy or silly or ridiculous. It can be those things. It doesn't have to be clownish or making a joke of things like, oh, let's have it be entertaining. But it has to be light in the sense of learning happens when we're relaxed, not when we're under the whip, or our nose is to the grindstone and all those metaphors that just sound terrible. No, we want to be alive for real and to be performing. And so mindfulness of ourselves and others, psychologically aware. Ultimately, a company is a psychological system of relationships, and how those are either abrasive or smooth or celebratory, or sad. Some places, I've worked in places years ago that, you go in and it's just like, oh my God, this is just like prison. Like, this feels terrible. It doesn't have to be like that. And so often we're brought in when things are pretty bad. Sometimes a company's at a growth edge and they say, hey, we know we're doing good, but we know we can do even more good. And so, it's different every time, but lots of listening, lots of, oh, what would feel safe to you? What would feel like a good starting point? Some companies want to start really small. Most do, like, oh, let's just start with a tiny pilot. Some are sort of like, oh no, this is like Western Hemisphere. We'll do Eastern Hemisphere next. Like, everybody's different at sort of their level of, I'm ready for this.
Well, I've been thinking. You said curiosity, right? This curiosity is important. Humility is important too, because if you don't have even a little bit of humility, then you can't let the light into that dark space. Talk a little bit about humility.
I think to understand something, we have to stand under it, and that's humility. And so I think that capacity to say I don't know um, is so essential. And we've sort of gotten that, like, that's a failure to say I don't know, or oh, how embarrassing to say I don't know. That's really sad, because I don't know is how learning happens. I don't know is how everything begins. There is no learning, there is no growth if we have to know, because at a certain point, if we take that to extreme, well, then what we know in this moment is all that we're ever going to know, and we're done. And something that's not evolving and changing, I have a little joke for that. I say there's a word for that. It's called dead. And so to be fully alive is to be this vibrant, changing thing, and it means acknowledging that I don't know, and I want to know, or at least I want to try to know. I want to try to understand. And again, I think that's that knowing. There's a book by Alan Watts called, I think it's called The Wisdom of Uncertainty. And uncertainty is what connects us. If we're certain, that's a really precarious situation, because it's not true. We can't be certain. And so if we're certain, we're already a tiny bit distant from the experience of reality, because change exists. We can't be certain, even about things like that you think you'd be absolutely certain about, you shouldn't be absolutely certain about. So the moment we're certain, we've already bumped out of what's real a little bit. But the problem is psychologically, we recognize that unconsciously, that that's precarious. And so what do? In that fear of that precariousness, we distance further and further and further until we're basically untouchable. And then we're dangerous to ourselves and others. Then it's clinical. It can get clinical. And so this capacity to say, I don't know, is a bridge to others. Like, in really simple things, we cannot know, oh, where are you from? I mean, that's an easy one. That's sort of socially acceptable. But what about something like, oh, what have you been thinking these days? Like, oh, what's been on your mind? And really be available to the answer. That's a different vulnerability, and it's a connector, and it connects us. We can only meet in reality in the present moment. Otherwise, we're sort of like fake meeting. It's like, hey, how you doing? Fine. Like it's that whole, like, you didn't actually ask, they actually didn't answer. You might as well not even been in the same country.
And you might not even have waited for the answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's really essential. Yeah.
Healthy organizations have healthy cultures,
Mm.
healthy environments where people can grow. And you're absolutely right. If you are not moving and changing, you are dying. Which is changing anyway, right? Until you don't change anymore, and then it's not an issue.
Well, if you're not, there's a law in science called entropy. And basically it's decay. If you leave a house alone and don't paint it and put a new roof on it and fix the windows when they're broken, at some point you just have a pile of trash or a pile of scrap. And the same is true with the human life. If you're not actually putting energy into the system to keep it vibrant, it'll still go on, but it'll just degrade over time. And that's really a materialistic or a scientific to an extreme worldview, that, oh, we're just this physical body and I'm just waiting for this thing to decay and die. And let's not even talk about various belief systems for beyond death. But during, if you want to be vibrant, if you want to be fully alive, you got to put energy into the system. That's where things like practices, sometimes called cultivation practices, we're cultivating the best self. So I think that's really essential. And it doesn't have to be meditation or mindfulness. It can be reading, it can be painting, it can be photography, it can be enjoying walks in nature. But if you're not putting energy into the system goes somewhere that you might not want it to go, because it gets to decide that. We let go of our autonomy. We let go of sort of our decision making when we let the system just do what it does. And I think that metaphor and that idea extends really nicely into our conversation around companies. Is that a company that's just sort of like just doing business, and not injecting the company with this energy of aliveness? I think that's where a lot of companies found each other. And then COVID hit and people said, oh, what? Like, I thought we did care about aliveness, but now it's very clear we don't. And I'm not going to stay somewhere. I'm not going to spend my life, not even for a paycheck. Like, I'm going to go do something that's alive, even if I don't get paid for it. A lot of people are doing that.
They're spending the time exploring what is important to them and getting more in alignment with that.
Mm.
Let's see. Are you up for one more question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I've heard a lot of people talking recently about just be you, just do you. How does that fit in with a big company? You know, for the individual who might be a little bit quirky or just does things differently 10-15% of the way, as opposed to, you know, that person who just really doesn't fit into the culture.
Mm-hmm.
How can a company be a space that can encourage that person or everybody's individual quirks to show up and still be productive? Yeah, feel that they can just show up as themselves and be productive. Mm.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question, because both sides want what they want, and both sides need to compromise. And so both sides need to decide how much compromise are they willing to bear. That's what a good relationship is you don't get exactly what you want. You get more and better because you're willing to share, whether it's resources or energy or time or whatever the nature of the relationship. So, you know, in the old days, I mean, I remember the idea that, oh, you get to put a picture of your family on your desk or a plant or something, like that was your way to show up as yourself, right? And that's just not good enough anymore. And so it's going to be a navigated thing. And I think it's a per company thing. Maybe new norms will emerge. But of course, an organization, again, by definition, is organized. You have to fall in line to the degree that you need to be a part of the group. And that's true of any group, whether it's a company or a club or whatever it is. You need to do what the group is doing. And so it'll be interesting to see how companies make more space. I know in like in the African American company around hairstyles, now companies are really being pushed on this, and I think they should be. And things like this, like let your natural hair show up at work. You don't have to fit in. And so, you know, tattoos, of course, you used to have one tattoo, you weren't getting a job. Now people have lots of tattoos, and companies are, you know, learning to accept this, that this is a unique self-expression. And so, but again, it's tough because the company has to sort of protect its image and how it wants to show up and what its norms are. And the individual has to protect their image and their norms. And then to find where it's going to work and how it's going to work, I think is a really delicate matter. Can't be anything goes either way. It can't be. I mean, it's just like in a society, it can't be anything goes. You can't hurt another person and not get in trouble for it, because then you don't have a society. You can't do anything that you want. You know, it's around mask mandates and things like this. Love it or hate it, if a mask mandate really threatens your freedom, then you might have a pretty flimsy freedom. Like, we want a deeper freedom than that. We want, like, and to have a deeper freedom than whether you get to wear a mask or not, or have to wear a mask, like, that takes real maturity. That takes real compromise. And again, wanting the team to win, not just the individual to feel like they're winning. No individual wins on their own. And so I think it's really important. So that's where alignment around purpose. When people are really connected to their coworkers and aligned around purpose, they're willing to say, oh, you don't like my flashing light that makes noise every 15 minutes? Okay, I'll be fine not bringing that to work because I believe in this mission. And of course that's a silly metaphor, but like whatever it is that might be an annoyance to others, oh, I'll leave that to work because I love my coworkers. Again, it doesn't mean that we love everything about them, but no, I love that we're aligned on this purpose. And the same is true. If the company actually loves its personnel, they'll say, oh, we'll slide a little bit on this thing for you because we care about you. Like without that caring, it's all just random policy. And not totally random, of course, but it feels like that to the individuals. It's like, oh, why can't we do that? Like if there's no real conversation or no real relationship, there's no real nothing. And so having those alignments, having those alignment on purpose in the service of performance irons out a lot of these little bumps. Again, another metaphor I like is when a sunflower follows the sun across the sky, that big face follows the sun. But every little tiny green leaf down the stalk tilts a degree or two to make sure it's getting the right airflow and the right amount of light too. But it doesn't think about it. It just follows the sun. It just follows the greatest purpose and the rest takes care of it. But without that greater purpose, it's just random. Like, oh, which way we want to turn these leaves? Oh, who cares? We'll turn them the other direction next year anyway. And then everybody loses the desire to actually do those little pieces because they're not aligned with turning towards the sun. And so a company needs to get really clear on purpose if it wants alignment.
Purpose and values. People need to understand them. I think that would be a really good exercise for people to do next week. Next week, ask everybody, so what do you think is the purpose of this company? What's the big goal that we're here for, right? That we're all pulling together for. We're all in the same rowboat. Let's all row together at the same time, in the same angle. Each department doing its own thing, but definitely moving in the same direction.
Hmm.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. This has been a deep, deep, deep drink in the well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Um, any last thoughts before I ask you the final question?
No, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking really important and informed questions and really sort of drawing the conversation out.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so final question. If you could speak to all the leaders in the world, all of them, and you knew that they would listen to you and that they would take to heart what you have to say and possibly even act upon it, what would you share with them?
Meditate daily, even if only for 1 minute a day.
It makes such a huge difference. I'm one of those people who has to do movement meditation. I cannot just sit there. I get monkey mind, so I have to move.
Well, great that you found what works for you.
Yes, yes, it's just finding something out like that. What is it that works for you, and then knowing, what, that's okay. That's okay. Can make all the difference in a person's life and in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining us, Jonathan. Been a pleasure to have you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for listening to Global Dreammakers Leadership Summit for Spring 2022. We have been with Jonathan Reynolds, the founder and CEO of Mindful Life, Mindful Work Incorporated. Thank you again, and we will see you. We'll have you back again. We will.
Thanks so much, Baylan.
Thank you.